Hello, it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to talk about a paper I wrote that was just released today that looks at how China's national oil companies are preparing for the energy transition. And I'd like to begin by sharing three pieces of background information. The first one is that my paper focuses on China's three major national oil companies, CNPC, Sinopec, and CNOOC, and their flagship subsidiaries. The second piece of information is that China's NOCs are large emitters of greenhouse gases, and this reflects the fact that they are very large producers of oil and natural gas and refiners of oil, not just in China, but globally. And the third piece of information is that President Xi's announcement of the 30-60 goals, carbon peaking before 2030 and carbon neutrality before 2060, is the central event around which my paper and my presentation today is organized. And so what I'd like to do in my remaining time is to summarize my answers to the four main questions that my paper addresses. The first one is, what were China's national oil companies doing to prepare for the energy transition before the 30-60 targets were announced? Second question, why did they engage in these activities? The third question is, why didn't the companies do more before September 2020? And the fourth question is, what are the implications of the 30-60 target for China's national oil companies? And so the first question is, what were the NOCs doing to prepare for a lower carbon future before Xi announced the 30-60 targets? And the companies were actually doing a number of different things. They were figuring out what their greenhouse gas emissions were, working to improve energy efficiency, to increase natural gas production. Companies were also investing in low carbon energy and technology. And they were also participating in international climate change bodies, of which CNPC's membership in the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative is perhaps the most prominent example. Now, why were the companies engaged in these activities? And there are a number of different domestic and international drivers. And when it comes to domestic factors, this was partly about responding to the Chinese government's climate change policies, but it also had to do with the government's policies aimed at slowing energy demand growth and reducing air pollution. In terms of slowing energy demand growth, concerns about energy demand in the early 2000s prompted the government to implement two very effective policies aimed at improving energy efficiency, the top 1,000 and the top 10,000 enterprise programs. And of course, concerns about air pollution also led to an effort to increase China's natural gas production and consumption. And also, it's important to note that China's national oil companies operate globally. They're listed on stock exchanges outside of China. And as a result, the companies had opportunities to engage with a lot of different actors from outside of China on climate change. For example, investors wanted to interact with did interact with the NOCs to help them develop climate mitigation strategies. Assets acquired in other parts of the world, such as within the European Union, meant the companies had to comply with foreign regulations. And of course, CNPC's membership in the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative resulted in CNPC and lots of other leading national and international oil companies discussing how they can best mitigate climate change impacts. And so why didn't the national oil companies do more before the 30-60 targets were announced? And the main reason for this is that the primary responsibility of China's national oil companies was to ensure China's oil and natural gas supply security. China's the world's second largest oil consumer and the world's third largest natural gas consumer, and it relies on imports for more than 70% of its oil and more than 40% of its natural gas. So this was a really big task. And it's not that the government didn't want the companies doing anything to respond to climate change, but rather that their number one job was to make sure that China had the oil and natural gas it needs to power its economy. So this brings me to the third question my paper looks at, which is what are the implications of the 30-60 targets for China's national oil companies? And there are three I'd like to highlight. The first one is that ensuring China's oil and natural gas supply security is still job number one. It's still the most important task for these companies. Even if China's oil demand peaks around 2025 or 2026, as some of the companies suggested, China's still going to need to consume and import a lot of oil for some time. And similarly, if you look on the right side of the slide, different companies in China's oil and gas industry expect China's natural demand to keep growing for some time, and that is almost certainly going to require additional natural gas imports. On the subject of natural gas, the second implication that I'd like to discuss is that it looks like China's national oil companies are shifting from oil and gas companies to gas and oil companies. If you look at the slide, you can see that the share of natural gas in the company's domestic production mixes has increased over the past 5 years. This is due in part to geology, in that a lot of China's major oil fields have peaked production and are in decline. And it's also due to policy. As I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons natural gas production is being increased is to meet growing demand. And that has to do with the government's policies to improve air quality. And I view the 30-60 targets as being another factor pushing the companies to focus on increasing natural gas production, especially in the short term. And finally, the third implication is that even though oil and gas is going to remain the core business of these companies in the short and medium term, all three major NOCs have started to expand into new energy and new technologies. CNOOC is focusing on offshore wind. Sinopec is making a big push to become a leading supplier of hydrogen fuel across China. And I view CNPC is taking what I call an all of the above approach, in that they are looking very seriously at and investing in a range of different things to include renewable energy, hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage. And so just by way of conclusion, I have a few points I'd like to make. As I mentioned throughout the presentation, oil and gas supply security and ensuring that China has the oil and natural gas it needs to power its economy is still the primary responsibility of these companies. Going forward, I see China's national oil companies as needing to balance their energy supply security agenda with energy transition goals. Natural gas is central to this balancing act because it's a way, of course, to ensure supply security, but it also can help China transition to a lower carbon future as long as methane emissions are controlled and natural gas is backing out coal. And finally, I see China's national oil companies continuing to invest in low carbon energy and technologies where they have comparative advantages. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
I'm Edmund Downie. I am a Ph.D. student at the Princeton School of Public International Affairs. I'm going to be presenting on a report that I published just last month while I was a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Energy Policy. The report looks at how firms in three high-emitting industries in China, it's coal power, steel, and cement, are responding to the new decarbonization pledges that Erica described in her presentation. That is for China to peak its emissions before 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality. That's its carbon emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. So for my report, I gathered and analyzed carbon emissions reduction targets set by 30 Chinese firms across these three sectors. I chose them because they are China's biggest sources of carbon emissions: coal power, steel, and cement, along with thermal heating and other types of thermal generation, comprise around 75% of national emissions. The 30 firms that I chose were top 10 largest firms in each sector, according to sector-specific criteria. For coal power, I looked at operating capacity, for steel at crude power output, and for cement at clinker capacity. Clinker is an intermediate product in the cement production process, and its production accounts for most of cement emissions. These 30 firms are major players in their sectors. Unsurprisingly, they comprise more than 50% of national coal power capacity and clinker capacity, as well as 35% of national steel output. And this is part of what makes them interesting to examine, because they do enjoy large market shares and because they're important standard setters for smaller firms as well. And they're important globally because China accounts for around half of each of these total. On the criteria listed here, China accounts for around half of each of these sectors worldwide. So estimating very roughly, these firms probably account for somewhere around 10% of global emissions. The table in this slide summarizes my findings, which are current as of July 1st, 2021, though I don't believe there have been changes since. It lists the number of firms in each sector with A, specific year targets for peaking carbon emissions, as in peaking emissions by 2025, for instance. B, specific year level targets for reducing total carbon emissions. So for instance, cutting carbon emissions by 30% from their peak by 2035. And C, specific year targets for achieving net zero carbon emissions. For instance, achieving net zero by 2050. And I found that target setting by firms in these sectors has been modest so far. 8 firms among the 30 that I reviewed have set targets that cover their Chinese facilities. One of these is a foreign firm. The other 7 are Chinese firms. They have all made their targets since the neutrality pledge. All the Chinese firms, that is, have made their targets since the neutrality pledge was announced in September 2020. Just 4 of the firms, the 30 firms I reviewed, have issued targets for reducing emissions after peaking, and just 3 have issued net zero targets. Targets have been announced also at the industry-wide level for cement and steel. For cement and steel, they are for peaking, and then there's also a emissions reduction target for steel. The tentative approach to target setting that we're seeing here is more conservative than what's seen in many US and European markets, particularly in electric power, where most big electric power generators have net zero pledges. But it's important to understand it isn't necessarily unusual among major emitters in the developing world. You can also see variation in sectoral lever behavior. In coal power, several firms have made peaking commitments, but just one of the top 10 majors has made pledges for cutting emissions after that. Steel is notably more ambitious. 3 of the top 4 biggest firms in the sector have made commitments for post-peaking emissions reductions, including net zero commitments from the sector's 2 biggest firms, Baowu and Hebei Iron and Steel, Hegang Jifeng. Cement is much less ambitious. There is a sector-wide peaking commitment for 2023, but otherwise no Chinese-owned firms have any firm-level carbon targets. This is a bit different from patterns among developed countries where electricity is usually the most ambitious, and steel, and especially cement, are usually more conservative. So here's a list of the 8 firms that had made commitments as of July 1st, 2021, of the 30 that I reviewed. They include, up at the top, 4 of the 6 biggest coal power firms in China. And these are 4 of the 8 biggest coal power firms worldwide. They also include 3 of the 4 biggest steel producers in China, and that's 3 of the 7 biggest steel producers worldwide. And they include 1 Taiwanese-owned cement firm. Note that foreign firms are, there are 3 of the 10 cement firms I reviewed were foreign or majority foreign, or sort of foreign controlling shareholders. All other firms that I reviewed are Chinese. Notice that of these 8, 6 are central state-owned enterprises. 1 is a provincial state-owned enterprise. and one is foreign or Taiwanese. That is most of the central SOEs, the 6 that have made commitments, and I'll talk more about why the central SOEs have been the fastest to move. I'll discuss here 2 reasons why firms have been cautious so far in their target setting. The first is about limits in carbon management expertise. The second is about how firms have reasons to wait in the current policy environment. First, a general reason for firms so far to be cautious in target setting is that they haven't generally done anything like this before. Firms haven't been asked in the past to do much around controlling carbon emissions, so this is a new area. China issued its first target for cutting carbon intensity in 2009, and the 12th and 13th 5-year plans, which cover 2011 to 2015 and 2016 to 2020, included carbon intensity reduction targets of around 17 to 18% in each period. And China does report success on achieving these carbon intensity reduction targets. But that success has actually come in large part as a byproduct of other energy, environment, and industrial development priorities that have been more immediate policy focuses over the past decade. The most important of these has been energy efficiency, but others have included air quality improvements and promoting renewables. And these policies and these priorities have included detailed implementation frameworks that have forced firms to figure out how to cut pollutant emissions and conserve energy and take advantage of renewable power subsidies in order to comply with government mandates and take advantage of government provided fiscal opportunities. Firms have not faced comparable policy demands around carbon. The only requirements of significance have been reporting emissions to authorities since around 2013, and compliance in certain regions with pilot trading systems that have actually served more as capacity building tools rather than spurs to emissions reductions in the short term. And so as a result, long-term planning around carbon management has not been a strong need. Secondly, lots of key policies that would inform target setting are still under formation. Chairman Xi's announcement of the peaking and neutrality targets in September 2020 was, in the words of Oxford scholar Michael Maidan, the beginning of a policy process rather than the end of one. The pledge was done in a very centralized fashion with senior leaders as well as some research support from Tsinghua researchers. But it was otherwise a surprise across the bureaucracy, and so it wasn't something necessarily that key ministries had prepared for. And so the past year has really been a process of bureaucrats and firms figuring out plans to implement these aims. Key documents forthcoming this year include the National Emissions Peaking Action Plan, as well as sector-specific 5-year plans. And firms have reason in this context to wait for more policy clarity. Central SOEs have faced the most immediate pressure to act. You can see on the right on my slide here, meeting of the State Asset Supervision and Administration Commission, who oversees central SOEs in late December, that identified participation in carbon peaking and neutrality work as one of 8 key tasks for central SOEs in 2021. But other firms don't necessarily face the same expectations. And so it's not surprising that central SOEs have set targets. Other firms have been more cautious. Moreover, I would say that the immediate policy focus right now in China is for peaking by 2030. And this is a relatively straightforward task, actually. And these circumstances give firms and officials alike some room to use the next 5 years to work on capacity building for deeper decarbonization. This is the kind of work that can inform long-term timelines, and those will be, and this work also will be much more important for neutrality. So a recent analysis by Energy Foundation China, based on official data through 2018, found that provinces accounting for 43% of emissions have already peaked, and provinces accounting for another 37% of emissions are on track to peak by 2025. So against this backdrop, firms have the next few years to wind down their fossil-based growth strategies and figure out how to position themselves for the new economy. Lastly, I'll note an important potential difference between target setting in China and many other economies, which is that target setting may end up being pursued in China with a more direct government hand. But China has precedent for using firm-level target setting to pursue energy policy goals. It used this approach starting in 2006 as part of its energy efficiency toolkit. I've displayed up here on this slide energy conservation quotas for firms in Beijing as part of the top 10,000 energy efficiency program, which identified large energy users and gave them individual emissions conservation quotas for 5-year periods. And these are credited by the IEA. This program and many other energy efficiency programs in total, with achieving enormous avoided carbon emissions. And so these forms of firm level administrative regulation are an extra reason for firms to move slowly in setting targets, because government guidance may end up extending to the firm level and providing that information. This is just some links for those who are interested in learning more of the report, and a podcast I did as well, and contact information. So I'm going to turn this back over to Helena. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. And it's really my great pleasure to be here and to share with you this topic, ready to meet the 3060 pledge. And this is from an observation from our survey in Chinese companies. And I'm Jingmin Wang, and it is really a good start to have this kind of communication. And I hope after that, because I only have 10 minutes limitation. So if you are interested in what we are doing now and what the companies are facing to, and we can chat after this conversation or after this conference later. All right. And let's take a look of what I'm prepared for today. And as you may say, or you may notice that our CMA Climate Change Center released the Blue Book on China, on climate change in China since the year 2018. And in the recent Blue Book, there is some sentence, and we can notice that China, as you can see, is also a sensitive and significant area of global climate change, and the rate of warming is significantly higher than the global average over the same period. And I want to read all of it, and that is what I want to share with you, that this is a global problem, so China cannot be ignored from the problem, and we have to face it, and it also can cause some damage and influence to our nation, and not only to the nation, but also worldwide. So we take serious about this climate change issue. And as you can see, and also Dr. Erica and Edmund mentioned that in last year, our President Xi Jinping pronounced this proposed this statement as a general debate of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And you can take a look of this statement. There is one word, I make it as the red one. And in his statement that we aim to have CO2 emissions peak before 2030. That is a one word changing before of our statement before that year. We use around 2030, and now we use before. That means the task will be more challenging for us. But Chinese government is a kind of government that what we announce is what we are doing, and we truly think it's not just a statement. It means real action. And why I say that, and you can see from the list, even it is in Chinese. I'm sorry, I have very rush time. I didn't translate all of it. And this is collected by one of the Ph.D. students in China. And he just collected all the announcement and statement after the year 2020 about President Xi Jinping. And you can see, even you cannot recognize the Chinese characters, but you can see the density of this statement of President Xi Jinping in different kind of conference or different meetings. That means we do really take serious about this action, and we do hope every region, all the regional government and companies can be involved in this action. So based on this, we try to think about how do the companies achieve this pledge, and what is status quo of the company so far, and are they truly ready for achieving this target. And of course, we can see that in this picture, we believe that to achieve 30 and 60 target is a kind of a systematic task that requires multi-section sectoral cooperation. And we can see this pathway is more and more clear, not only involving the supply of energy, but also the heavy industry and architecture sector transformation and the CCUS, etc. So this map is totally clear. But if we take a look or we make an observation of the single company, are they ready for that? So that is what we are trying to figure out. And based on that, we just grouped a team of members to make a topic. We call it the research on carbon neutrality path of state-owned enterprises. And why we focus on the state-owned enterprises, because just like Edmund mentioned, most of the state-owned enterprises, they are the great or the greatest number of the carbon emission. So we are trying to, I'm sorry, there's something always be there. I try to, oh, that's okay. That's okay. We're trying to figure out what they are doing. And our research coverage is include electricity, petroleum, chemistry, steel, and non-ferrous metal, and civil aviation, etc. And the department or individual we try to make the survey include the strategic department and the energy management department, and the CEO, the department managers, etc. So our survey is covered timeline is from the July to September, and more than it's around 20 companies we make the survey. And we during this session we extended our survey to not only the SOEs but also some leading private companies. And we use a questionnaire and interview all the related method. And what we get here, what we got from this research. Although the report is still under amending and supplementation, and due to the time limitation for today, I just want to summarize it as below. Yeah, and we noticed that most of the companies, they have a very strong willingness and consciousness of the 30-60 pledge, and they truly want to do something, and they know that if they don't do that, there will be a very big pressure from the government or from the central government. So they have a very strong willingness, and most of the managers and the CEOs we make the survey, they do have a frequent training. This training made not only from the organizations, from the society, but also from the government. So from the central government and the regional government, they made a lot of trainings or frequent trainings to ask all the CEOs and the managers to take and to understand, try to understand our government policy or the current regulations, etc., and what's the meaning of 30 and 60 and what they should do, etc. So they do a lot of training there, and they try to understand the pressure of transformation. They do understand the pressure of the transformation. And among all kinds of companies of the industries, we noticed that especially the electricity industry, the company from the electricity industry, they establish the sub-carbon asset management companies, because before this 30-60 pledge, they already got the they already be involved into the carbon trading market of the pilot regions since the year 2013. So they are truly ready, especially the electricity industry. They are ready for the national part of the carbon trading market. So if they establish the sub-carbon asset management company to make the carbon accounting and to make the management of their carbon assets and to make the tactics to let them involved into our trading market, etc. And all of the companies, they are trying to make their 14th five-year planning, and they are also under the progress so far. And especially the electricity companies are working in the front. And still have some problems, of course, because we are just under the progress to achieve and make a plan. What are the problems? First of all, is the carbon lock-in effect is still strong in China, because our energy structure is still rely on coal and the traditional energy. So the carbon lock-in effect is still strong. And there are still some companies, they have the wait and see attitude, because they don't have the responsibility, all the carbon, they are not involved into the carbon allowance system. So they still wait and see, and to see what we should do, because for them there is really pressure, and something means cost. And there's the third problem is a technical problem. For example, in steel industry, there are some technical problem, and we need to, not only one company or two companies to face or to solve it. We need more great solve the technical problem altogether. For example, the hydrogen metallurgy technology is still under development, not only for the Chinese steel company, but also for the other steel companies in the whole world. So if we can use the hydrogen to do the metallurgy part, and that will be carbon, we will cut the carbon part from this procedure. So the technical problem is still need to be solved. And also we need to construct the national carbon trading market and to put it in the healthy way. So you can see from the Chinese government really sensitive, and we are cautious to start our carbon trading market. We didn't open it with a lot of kind of entity to be involved. Only electricity companies are can be involved into the trading of the allowances so far. And we will gradually to involve the steel or the other industries to be into the market gradually at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. Okay, so there's still also the problem is the comprehension of 30-60 goals. Should the company as an individual to achieve the 30-60 goals, or what exactly the meaning of it to the individual company? That is also some CEO or the managers, they are still blurred of this kind of concept, and we need more training and to let them take a look of it. And so what we suggest, well, because of the time limitation, I will stop here, and if we have time, we will continue to discuss about this part, okay? And now, so far, our school released the monthly review of China's carbon trading market, not only in Chinese website, but also in YouTube, and I put the links here, and if you are interested, and you can take a look of our monthly review there. And we also have the our school's website here. And thank you for watching.
Yeah, thank you. This is Lee from my China office. Today I'm going to talk about the pathway of China's steel industry decarbonization and the company's action. So my speech will be based on this report recently released just today, earlier today, by my China office. Yeah, so as you may know, China is the world's largest steel producer and consumer, and the steel industry represents nearly 17% of China's carbon emission in 2019. So it's really crucial for the steel industry to reach the carbon neutrality for the whole country's carbon neutrality goal, and even the global climate change. And so my team has done a series of research to analyze the zero carbon scenario of China's steel industry and the pathway towards it. There are majorly three actions areas of steel sector decarbonization. The first is to reduce the demand, and the second is to increase the secondary steel share, and the last is to use decarbonized primary steel pathways. So as you can see on this screen, right now we have first the steel production of China's steel sector will more than 1 billion tons per year in 2020 to only 620 million tons in 2050 under RMI's zero carbon scenario. And the production mix will be really changed from over 90% on fossil fuel-based blast furnace route to majorly dominated by clean primary and clean secondary. First, on the second secondary steelmaking site. Under the zero carbon scenario, we think the secondary steel share will reach 60% by 2050 with a growing scrap resource availability. On the one hand, domestic scrap supply will greatly expand in the next few decades as China reaches the maturity of industrialization and urbanization. We would expect the ferrous scrap supply reaching 400 million tons by 2030 and 500 million tons by 2050. On the other hand, the scrap import has been re-permitted in earlier 2021. So that will also support the supply sustainability and price stability of China's scrap market. But we need to mention of the secondary steel capacity expansion is the recycling system development. More standardized, well-organized scrap recycling system is really crucial. Is needed to be built in the next decade to ensure the wide application of electric arc furnace in the steel industry in China. Second, on the primary steel side, there are actually many technologies now available to choose. For example, the direct reduced iron, the smelting reduction, or the direct electrolysis. All these technologies could be mature by 2050 and may scale up in China. Well, the main logic of zero carbon primary steel is that, as shown in this screen, is to start from the current status and then to decarbonize the reducing agent from carbon to hydrogen or other materials by changing the iron making method from blast furnace to DRI or smelt reduction or even the electrolysis. For example, the hydrogen can be blended into the blast furnace if we continue to use it. But CCS is for the carbon. If we still use the blast furnace route, while changing to DRI or smelting reduction route, all these two routes will help us to fully use hydrogen or other clean reducing agent for steelmaking. Also, the electrolysis can be used to fully avoid the need of coal or hydrogen, but the electrolysis technology still needs further development in the next few decades. And RMI also have analyzed the economic competitiveness of all these zero carbon steelmaking routes. So currently in 2020, the zero carbon routes has a 40% to 100% cost premium over the conventional route. But in the next 30 years, with the technology development cost of all the hydrogen, of CCS and other technologies and economics of scale, we estimate that the zero carbon steel would be the economic competitiveness of zero carbon steel would be greatly improved, especially for hydrogen DRI route. It is really possible to meet cost parity with conventional route if the hydrogen price is under $1.5 per kilogram. And moreover, the carbon price with China's emission trading market in the future would increase the economic favorability of zero carbon technology. So on the capacity, the scrap supply, the renewables resource, the CCS capacity, and we try to map the pathway of China's steel decarbonization in the future. Short term, by 2030, the key actions are we could develop scrap recycling in some, especially coastline and the southwest, and we can pilot hydrogen blending in blast furnace all around China, and also we can pilot hydrogen DRI route where the renewables are really rich, and we can pilot CCS route where the CCS capacity is really available, and we can also have some companies to try the smelting reduction pilot. And then by 2050, all these technologies will work together in different regions to support the zero carbon transition of the steel industry. So companies will consider their renewable resources, their capacity, financial status, and the CCS route, all of those factors together, and to form a really fully zero carbon steel industry in the future on our side. Well, for all these new zero carbon technology may also bring some new business models to China's steel market. On the one hand, all these zero carbon technologies may relocate to the West China, where renewables are really cheap. On the other hand, there may establish a new market. So the iron making process would be accomplished where the renewables are really cheap, for example, West China or even Australia or Brazil. And then the steel making process will be finished using existing facility. This will also improve the economics of all those zero carbon technologies. Well, for all those steel making companies in China, transition still face all those challenges, but also there are some opportunities. All the challenges I think many panelists have already introduced. Well, we think all those companies also have some advantages. For example, they are entering a stage of declining demand, and with an increasing supply of scrap in the future. Also, we think the Chinese companies have the experience and ability to promote innovation and the scaling up effect of new technologies. Moreover, all those state-owned enterprise, the SOEs, they really have the motivation and the stability to implement the national strategy and policies. So with all those challenges and advantages, we already see many steel-making companies in China are taking their actions on the commitment level and also at the actions and really to implement all those technologies. So we have seen Bao Steel, HBS, the Angang and Baogang, they already made the commitment of carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. And also all those companies are piloting the hydrogen DRI route and also smelting reduction route from so there are and may produce the first ton of zero carbon steel in the next few years. Also, are really taking fast actions to promote the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality of the whole industry. So from President Xi announcing the carbon neutrality target, we have seen the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology has kicked the carbon reduction action plan for major heavy industries, including the steel industry from last and the draft of the carbon peaking action plan of steel industry has already been finished by the China Iron and Steel Association. So we have a really positive attitude that the steel industry will move faster in the next few years to implement all those new technologies and to work together towards the carbon neutrality goal.
Well, thank you very much, Helena, and thank you to everyone at the Beijing Global Center of Columbia University for all your work in putting together this great session. We're very grateful. And I want to offer congratulations to our speakers, all of whom have put out reports, and they're really very informative and excellent reports. Dr. Erica Downs' report is being released today. And if anyone would like to follow up on this, please go to our website at the Center on Global Energy Policy where you can find it. Ned Downie's report was released several weeks ago, and you can find that on our website as well. And we just heard that Yuli has put out a report today, I think she said, or from Rocky Mountain Institute, yes. And that was a fascinating presentation. And then Professor Wang is doing research and has put out reports on this as well. So it's really a tremendous group. So I thought I would just start by asking Professor Wang a question about something she said at the beginning of her presentation. Professor Wang, you mentioned the Blue Book on China and climate change, and talked briefly about the impact of climate change in China. And before we talk about companies and their actions, I just wondered if does your Blue Book discuss what impact climate change has already had in China, and what impacts are projected to occur from climate change in China? And if so, maybe you could just share that with the audience. I think there's some audience members who may not be familiar with climate change and what impact it has. And could you just say something about that, please?
Thank you for this question, David. And because I didn't read the 2021 Blue Book in detail so far, but what I can see from the previous ones is mostly this Blue Book is from the scientific view of the climate change, the degree of the changes, the trend, and the influence to our ecological cycle and also the others. But it is not from the economic view, mostly it's from the scientific view. And I'm not sure whether our Blue Book, you got the English version, and if we do, and I can find it for you, and also for the audience. And if we don't, I can try to translate some part of it to let our audience to know further about the information, okay?
Well, thank you. That's a really important resource, I think. And for people in the audience who may not be familiar with climate change, there was a major study released this summer by the international body that studies these topics on the science of climate change, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And there's been a lot of work around the world on the impacts of climate change. And I know in my country, in the United States, in the past year, it's been extraordinary what we've seen. I mean, we have in the United States, we have wildfires, we have floods, all kinds of problems as a result of climate change, and it's happening all over the world. And unless we can all make progress in this global issue, it's going to be a problem for us, our children, for our grandchildren. So
I believe
go ahead.
I believe we got the same situation, not only because climate change, just like you mentioned, is not only for regional part, it's for the global part, the global perspective. So we also have the flood issue or other problems that may not only got damage to the earth, but also got the damage to the human beings society. So that I think why the China and the Chinese and the United States government, we got this kind of statement to make the statement based on the climate change damage, and the so that means we got the same damage or the same situation at this moment. Yeah,
this is one where we're in this together.
Yes.
And just one final word on this. I know in the United States, we have some cities like Miami and New Orleans that are very low, at sea level, and already are suffering from sea level rise. In Miami, sometimes when the tide is high, the water comes up into the streets. And in New Orleans, it's actually below sea level. And in China, there are many cities along the eastern coast that have tens of millions of people have the same type of vulnerability. So I think there's really a shared vulnerability here that we all need to work on together.
Yeah. That's why,
yeah. So I thought maybe then it just turned to the kind of core issues raised by the presentations, which are just so interesting about Chinese companies and what Chinese companies are doing on climate change. And I think I learned a lot reading these reports and listening to the presentations, and I hope everyone else did too. Several of you talked about what more needs to be done to develop the capacities within the companies to address these issues. And you made the point that previously companies have really not been focused on carbon management, but now that President Xi has announced these 30-60 goals, the companies are starting to address climate change and carbon management in a more serious way. And I wondered if anyone has any thoughts about the types of capacities and abilities that need to be developed within the companies in order for them to contribute to meeting President Xi's goals.
I'm happy to jump in, and I know my panelists will know these things very well as well. I mean, some of the basic work is around continuing to strengthen sort of monitoring capabilities. about just making sure you understand fully what are your emissions and doing that kind of inventory work. That is work that's been done over the past decade, but there's continued progress that has to be made on that, particularly in sectors like steel. So that's just a basic thing about knowing what your emissions are. There are also sort of structural developments about building in internal systems of key performance indicators, for instance, about incorporating this into strategies and having internal incentives that force companies and encourage employees to actually take these issues seriously. And lastly, I think there's a sort of a tech innovation issue and a commercialization of advanced technologies issue here. For getting neutrality, we need to be deploying technologies that are not necessarily commercially deployed at scale. From carbon capture and hydrogen would stand out in particular. And so that's work where corporate R&D is going to be an important feature in taking some of these technologies from sort of the stage they're at, demonstration, pre-commercial stage, to something that can be more widespread.
And I'll just pick up where Ned left off on the issue of new technologies that are not yet commercially deployable. David, when you asked your question, I was thinking about my own research on China's national oil companies, and the companies, especially CNPC and Sinopec, for a long time now have been developing carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies. And I think that the 30-60 targets look like they might add impetus to the companies to double down on those technologies with the goal of getting them to be deployed commercially at scale. And of course, in the case of CNPC, they have a carbon capture, utilization, and storage plant at Jilin that, according to the CCS, the Global CCS Institute, is the 18th largest CCUS project in the world, that moved in 2018 from the demonstration to the commercial operation stage. And also, just on the subject of hydrogen, there's a lot of enthusiasm around hydrogen. Again, the NOCs were working on hydrogen as a transport fuel before Xi made his announcement. And I have been struck since Xi announced the 30-60 goals at the amount of enthusiasm within the companies, especially Sinopec, for developing hydrogen as a transport fuel. Right now, most hydrogen in China, as in elsewhere in the world, is gray hydrogen. It's made from fossil fuels, but I do expect to see more work from the companies towards developing green hydrogen and blue hydrogen, now that we have the 30-60 goals out there, with an eye not to both to helping China meet these targets, but also helping to meet the world decarbonize. So I think, as one of the other presenters mentioned, that right now, for example, the cost of green hydrogen is very, very high, but I do expect that will come down in the future.
Yeah, this is Agnes. Sorry about my internet, but I would like to also add on to the technology development point. I think it's really very important for all the steel companies to develop their technology and to just try to scale up all these zero carbon technologies. So in China, you can see the Hegang HBS group. They are collaborating with the Tanova company from Italy to develop the hydrogen DRI technology project. And we can see Jianlong Steel, a domestic private steel company. They're actually developing their own smelting reduction facility, which will be based on coal right now, but will be like fully hydrogen based in the future, which is really impressive. And yeah, when we have seen many like others like Baogang or other steel companies, they're really developing their own technologies and trying to implement a pilot projects in China. But I would also like to mention that all those technology or the technology development are not only on the steel making. I think it should be a value chain development. They should also invest or invest in the whole value chain. For example, the hydrogen. I think also as the same as the oil and gas company, we are seeing Baogang the Bao Steel, they have established their own hydrogen company under the whole group. So they would like to start from the renewable energy and then to produce hydrogen and maybe use their byproduct hydrogen and then to use all those hydrogen for steel making. I think that's really important for the hydrogen route to cut its costs in the future. And also we are seeing some steel companies are thinking about entering into the scrap recycling market. That will also be a like vertical value chain integration. And besides the technology, I think for the steel industry, the industry restructuring is also really valuable. They like right now, some steel making companies are merging together so they can be more stable to the market change, and they can have an extra cash or extra capacity to work together to meet this carbon neutrality goal. I think this kind of change is also really helpful for the steel industry to meet the decarbonization goal.
Just to follow up on that quickly, that's mergers between different steel companies that you're discussing there?
Yeah, the steel companies are merging together. For
see.
example, I think the Bao Steel has merged several steel companies around all across China. Yeah.
I see. So we've just had some very interesting comments on technology issues and hydrogen in particular. And I think it might be worth explaining to some people in our audience that hydrogen can be made in a number of different ways. And actually, Dr. Downs discusses this in her report. But hydrogen can be made in ways that, and I think Dr. Downie does as well. Hydrogen can be made in ways that are from fossil fuels. And if you make hydrogen from fossil fuels, it's not a clean fuel. It produces pollution and produces global warming gases. But if you make hydrogen from renewable power, or if you capture the carbon, then it becomes a clean fuel. And people, they put colors on this and call it gray hydrogen when it's made from fossil fuels, and blue hydrogen when it's carbon capture, and green hydrogen from renewable energy. And I wonder what is the progress in developing either green hydrogen or blue hydrogen in China today? Are there many steps in that direction?
I think I can add on to this. Yeah, I'm just talking through my phone, so you may see me on the screen. Yeah, so
you can see you. Yeah, the connection's good.
Okay, cool. Right now, for China's hydrogen production, majorly it's really based on fossil fuel. Only I think 4% is the green hydrogen route, which is really, I think, normal across the world. But in the future, I think we are expecting a growing of green hydrogen in China with the mass renewable capacity expansion and the effort from various companies towards this direction. We have seen, for example, the PetroChina, and also the State Energy Group, and also the State Grid Company, Bao Steel, all of those state-owned enterprise from all sectors, they are investing in green hydrogen route, and they're quite aligned that green hydrogen route will be the future of China's hydrogen development. But the question right now is really the cost, and where are the demand of all those green hydrogen. So it's really it's always a chicken and egg problem for hydrogen, for green hydrogen development. All the heavy industries need the green hydrogen. Well, who provides the green hydrogen in China? So I think it's a good trend that all those state-owned enterprises are both producing the hydrogen but also using the hydrogen. Maybe they can form a loop within all those companies, and then to really boost the hydrogen market in China. Yeah, that's my perspective.
Thank you. Very interesting. How about carbon capture in China? What is the most recent developments with carbon capture utilization and storage in China?
Well, I want to say something not only about the CCUS, but also just Lee mentioned about our hydrogen technology, but not only hydrogen. I think in China, generally speaking, and with the other countries, we have the same situation, because the technology development, the innovation is not only belong to one country. Now we are just on the step or on the stop to put forward to get the green or blue hydrogen and also the lithium. And we're trying to push our not only hydrogen. I think hydrogen just in the short term cannot be a replaced energy to the coal or the other kind of traditional fuels, fossil fuels. No, it is just take only a few or several percentage of the energy construction. But we have to develop not only on hydrogen, but also the clean usage of kind of fossil fuel and coal, also the lithium economy. We're trying to focusing on different kind of technology innovation development. And the CCUS, yes, there is one way, but CCUS is in my point of view, so far is still under the development, and the scale usage of the CCUS technology is on the way to come, and because the cost is still there. And in our survey, we noticed that there are some big corporation, they are doing that this kind of pilot zoom in their sub company to use a CCUS, but it's just under the development yet. It's not that mature.
I think this is in some ways it's true all over the world. I think both with respect to hydrogen, as Agnes was saying, and with respect to CCUS, it's just getting started, and that makes me wonder about international cooperation. And is there a role for international cooperation in China in helping to scale up these technologies? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Definitely, yeah. I would like
Please,
to others.
Professor Wang, yeah.
No, definitely. I think the international cooperation is one very important way for us, not only in the technical development, but also to achieve the 30-60 goal of China. It's really important, and we do still have the international cooperation not between the United States or other European or the other countries, and we do love this kind of the cooperation, and not only from the achievement of this 30-60 goals, we also have this kind of cooperation in education perspective. And for example, in our school, we call us the International School of Low Carbon Studies, just because we based on the international cooperation. We invited the German professors and the professors from Japan, from Germany, from England, and to be the part of our committee. And we try to do this research based on the international perspective as well. So that is what I want to say, and I think the other scholars and professors, they must have something want to say. So please.
So I can make a few comments from my work on China's oil companies. First, I just wanted to note that I had actually done some initial research on this topic starting at the end of 2019. So this was obviously before President Xi made his announcement. And at the time, I noticed that China's oil companies, especially CNPC and Sinopec, had definitely built up quite a bit of in-house expertise on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And part of this was motivated by a desire to get more oil, to produce more oil from China's old oil fields. But it seemed like that they built up this expertise, but there wasn't a lot of forward momentum. And I suspect that had to do, of course, with cost. Cost is still a factor, but I will note that since Xi announced his target, there does seem to be a resumption of some of that momentum. Sinopec, for example, has announced that it's going to start a big new CCUS project. So that was sort of one observation I wanted to make. And then just the second point in response to your most recent question, David, that there has been cooperation between China's oil industry and the United States, West Virginia University, in years past on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So I'm hopeful that that type of cooperation might be able to happen again. Although it may be a bit challenging right now, given the political relationship between the United States and China. But again, I am hopeful that this is something that at some point in the future may be resumed.
Yeah, I think I'll build on that point. I think that sort of the environment for international cooperation right now is certainly one that is evolving in the context of sort of broader changes in the relations of China and Europe, and China with the US and Europe. And I think that will be an important kind of overall determinant of the possibilities of different cooperation in some technologies that are at once crucial for the global energy transition, and also areas of potential competition around industrial policy. That being said, I think it's pretty clear that sort of we need progress on hydrogen and CCUS and these other sectors, and that progress comes through effective scientific and corporate international cooperation. And so I think through panels like this, we're bringing together guests from both sides of the Pacific that have these discussions. I think that's really important work in this context. And I think also, you can see we think of cooperation maybe sometimes in terms of exchanges and dialogues like what we're having here. There are other forms of cooperation that happen on corporations on the supply chain. So global supply chains mean that, suppliers and their consumers are in, or sort of users who are, at other places in that supply chain are in direct discussions, and those can have ways in which, the demands of a European company who has expectations from its shareholders to report its carbon footprint in a comprehensive manner down its supply chain can end up affecting the decisions of some of its suppliers. So to give an example, and I don't want to overstate the importance of this, but it's notable that some media coverage of Baowu, the Chinese steel company that we mentioned, that discussed its decision to embrace the carbon transition more aggressively, noted how they had been experiencing some requests from European buyers who are not a major market for them, but a small market, that they provide more information about their carbon footprint. And that was among their many considerations in their decision making. And so I think in that regard, we have sort of academic kind of research-based discussions. And then we also have the opportunities that globalization provides, where standards in some countries can end up affecting the decisions of other countries. And I think maybe in this case, we saw sort of Europe and China, but I think going forward, we should be thinking about China and its iron ore suppliers around the world, for instance.
I want to invite Mr. Lee to make any comments that he might want to make on any of these topics, if you'd like to speak.
各位朋友，非常高兴参加这个交流哈，这个晚上刚才很不好意思，因为这个电脑出现问题，没有及时进来。我简单给各位朋友介绍一下我们中石油现在目前情况这块大概情况。刚才实际上各位也在谈这个事情，包括这个 CCUS， 包括氢能，包括这个减污降碳，实际上中石油一直在行动的事情，一直在做的工作。从这个我简单给大家说一下，这个目前这个 CCUS 这块呢，目前中石油呢，我们有一个中国石油的一个勘探开发技术研究院，专门搞勘探开发的一个研究院。他们呢现在是一直在研究这个 CCUS 这个技术这块。目前呢，我们在 CCUS 这块呢，在这个大港油田，就是在天津，位于中国天津的大港油田，还位于中国这个陕西那边的一个长庆油田，还位于中国这个吉林的一个吉林油田， CCUS 这个技术一直在现场这里用，主要用于二氧化碳去油，就用二氧化碳来注在地下去，把油给取出来。但是目前存在的问题主要是刚才各位朋友也说了，主要是价格问题，现在价格比较贵，这是这个事情。目前还处于一个研究这个阶段，这是在 CCUS 情况这块儿。另外在氢能这块呢，氢能这块呢，现在是我们这边的在中石油有一个叫石油化工研究院，也在搞这边专门成立了一个，从今年5月份，这个院呢专门成立了一个，就中国石油化工研究院，专门成立了一个氢能研究机构，他们专门研究氢能的，一个是怎么产生，就是水制氢啊，或者天气制氢啊，刚才这个朋友提到的灰氢、绿氢、蓝氢这块怎么制备，这是第一步。另外这个制备氢怎么储存，因为这个氢这块呢，氢能这块呢，现在除了这个制作工艺之外，还有一个就是运输这块，现在现在也是问题。目前国内在运输这方面呢，现在目前还没有成熟技术，因为在钢材这块全清脆，包括这个氢里储存这一块，因为这个清脆这块很容易使这个装的氢材料氢的这个东西呢，容易发生腐蚀这块，所以氢这块呢，现在目前也处在一个研究阶段。中石化呢，现在刚才一个朋友提到中石化他们布局准备是在这个2025年，就是到2025年的时候，准备建1000座加氢站，就加氢站这块。我们中石油呢，现在也在对氢这块也在布局这块。可能大家都知道，在明年年初召开的冬奥会上，中石油在冬奥会上有一个加氢站，也已经布局这个加氢站。但这个加氢站目前的氢气呢，氢气来自于我们这个华北石化，就是也是指在河北的任丘有一个华北石化，从华北石化这个他们是天然气制氢，从天然气制氢拉到这个地方去，所以刚才提到主要氢这块还是成本比较贵，所以目前都是一种研究，处于这个目前还处于研究过程，这是这一块事情。另外我们在这个碳达峰、碳中和这方面呢，实际上除了这个刚才提到的 CCUS， 还有氢能这块也做了很多工作，包括结构调整，这个能源结构调整事情。能源结构调整，我们现在正在除了布局氢能之外，这个正在布局太阳能，还有布局风能。尤其在这个海上，我们有些海油田在布局风能，在西北，像新疆、甘肃、青海的地方，我们正在布局太阳能，因为这地方是比较沙漠，所以那戈壁滩上正在布局太阳能这块的事情。包括我们现在下一步呢，对我们加油站现在顶棚上可能都要改成太阳能这个工作事情，这是布局在我们这个中石油在这个结构调整上，这是一个。还有我们现在下一步呢，现在逐渐把煤替代，现在煤基本上替代完了，就现在所有的煤的这个已经不存在煤的这个燃煤锅炉了，燃煤锅炉基本上替代完了，下一步我们可能还要用电来替代这个气，替代天然气，这样的话更加把这个能源结构调整过来这是一个能源结构调整事情。第二个呢，就是我们在这个在节能减排方面，实际上我们认为呢，这个碳中和下部的一个碳中和一个重要的一个减排手段，碳减排就是要节能降耗，就是节约能源，降低能耗这个事情。中石油这个工作呢，实际上在刚才有位朋友提到，中石油实际上这个工作已经在2000年前都在做这工作。我们在中石油以这个清华大学，还有以各种研究机构呢，也正在开展这工作，就是开展这个能源优化，就是用能优化，就是把这个这个电能，包括这个给就是耗电低，要把这个工作做好之前，就是通过这个系统优化来降低这个能耗，这是一个重要过程。另外呢，我们现在还开展的就是把这个甲烷这块甲烷回收。以前甲烷这块呢，就是这种散排的还量比较大，现在正在开展甲烷回收工作，要求到这个我们正在这个甲烷这块呢，今年呢有个数据，今年是相对来说我们甲烷数据呢， 甲烷是2020年，就去年从前年相比的话，我们甲烷的排放强度一能下降了6%，所以我们想呢，通过这个甲烷排放管控行动方案呢，可能甲烷都要，因为甲烷它也是一种产品，它也是一种能源这块儿，你排放走了，它那也损耗很大，所以甲烷这块儿是我们下一个重点方向，把甲烷的包括油田的炼厂的甲烷都要收回来，都要减少它的外排，这一块儿。另外，中石油正在建设叫绿色企业创建活动。绿色企业创建活动就包括它不仅甲烷事情，还包括能耗，包括产品，包括污染物排放，包括微油次排放，这所有的东西，只要你就都要满足国家标准，第一国家，并且严格第一国家标准，用最先进的技术。这一块我们正在2000年呢，就是2001年，就是今年，专门出了一个中石油的。就是这个炼化企业、这个炼油企业的，还有油气田企业以及成品油销售企业的绿色企业达标这个标准，这个标准呢，已经发布了，年底要对第一批开始评比的实行。我想通过这个绿色企业创建活动呢，可能中石油这个碳中和的这个行动应该做得更好的事情。我就简单向各位朋友们介绍这一点。还有什么问题可以问一下啊？
Thank you very much. That was fascinating, and it's very interesting how much activity is going on within CNPC on this. Erica Downs, you wrote in your report about the activities of the different oil companies. I wonder, do you have any thoughts about why some companies are undertaking different types of activities and the differences between the national oil companies and their responses to climate change?
Sure. I think some of it has to do with where the companies see they have a comparative advantage. So for China National Offshore Oil Corporation, one of the reasons they're focusing on offshore wind is because they have decades of experience operating offshore. And if you want to move from producing wind onshore to offshore, it's that ocean engineering experience that is the biggest barrier to be overcome. For both Sinopec and for CNPC, I suspect that one of the reasons they are focusing on hydrogen and hydrogen as a fuel is that both companies have large networks of service stations around the country. So Sinopec has more than 30,000, CNPC has more than 20,000, and this gives them an advantage in rolling out hydrogen as a fuel because they can just build, as Dr. Lee mentioned, hydrogen refueling stations at existing sites, and you know, for CCUS as well, both companies have you know, a history of doing carbon capture and storage for enhanced oil recovery. So I see those comparative advantages as focusing some of their energy transition decisions.
实际上刚才我说的给大家朋友介绍的中石油，就中国石油跟中国石化这两家央企呢，就三桶油、两桶油做的工作是基本上在这个碳中和、碳减排方面。做的工作基本上是一样的工作，就是他们做的，我们也在做，都在做，也都在搞技术，搞科技研究，来突破这些工作。所以说中海油这块呢，因为中国海洋石油公司的他们的这个叫战场，叫他们的这个领域呢，他们的工作环境主要在海上，所以他们在陆上这块可能做的少点，这个时间这块大概的情况大概是。
Very interesting. Thank you. So we're actually slightly over time. We're going to go a little bit late here. We're going to end at 9:30, and I know it's getting late in Beijing. But I want to ask about. We have a question in the Q&A from the audience about the current power shortages in China right now. And I don't know if any of our panelists have any thoughts about the current power shortages and the causes of that, and any, what are the prospects? And so maybe I thought we'd just ask about that, since it's a topic that's in the news and it's getting attention. And then just give everyone a chance for a final, minute or two of final thoughts. So does anybody have any thoughts about the current power shortages that they'd like to share with the audience?
I'm happy to kick this off because I think this is a really important question. And I think that the answer about, so the power shortages right now, for those who haven't been following, there are, I think to date, 15 to 20 provinces so far where there have been news reports of rationing, different kinds of actions taken by policymakers to ration power demand. And this is in response to strains on the grid. There's a number of discussions what the driving factors are. I think the most compelling one, and it applies across all provinces, just that coal prices are very, very high right now, and that hurts the margins of coal power plant operators, and so they are sort of more reluctant to operate. And that's particularly true in China because of a pricing structure where there's fairly limited space for the sales price of electricity to float, even as coal prices obviously can float quite enormously. I think as for its long-term impacts on the energy transition, I think it's a really important question. And I think that the answer to that partly depends on how policymakers respond. There certainly is a kind of a long-term dynamic by which declining demand for fossil fuels drives reduced supply investments, and so, or expectations of long-term decline demand drives reduced supply investments, and so sort of access to some of these fossil fuels, particularly in the short term, when our demand isn't quite yet falling, but companies know that demand will fall in the future, may face some strains in that regard. I think on the other hand, this is also an opportunity for instance, progress on electricity pricing market reforms that has been of interest since the mid-2010s from Chinese policymakers, and is now the sort of the struggles and power shortages that are associated with electricity pricing, basically mechanisms and flat electricity pricing, is something that where we may get a little bit more space for progress on that. So I think it really depends upon how policymakers respond.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
So I agree with Ned in that I also find like the most persuasive explanation to be the high coal prices and the fact that for a lot of coal power plants, the prices are so high that it doesn't make sense to operate. A factor that I've seen discussed in some of the media coverage of these shortages has to do with energy targets and the fact that quite a few provinces have not yet met targets for reducing energy intensity, and that power shortages, power rationing may also be a way to help get provinces back on track for meeting those targets.
Well, very good. All right, we're running out of time, and I thought maybe we just turn to each of our presenters and speakers, maybe in reverse order, and just have them say a few words if they'd like to say a few words, just by way of any final thoughts or wrapping up. And maybe start with you, Yali, if you have any final thoughts. And again, congratulations on the release of your report, which I'm looking forward to reading.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I learned a lot from all the panelists today, and thank you for inviting me here. I think just from we are an organization trying to promote the decarbonization of heavy industries and the green hydrogen development in China. We want to build the bridge between China and the international market to collaborate and to communicate on all those decarbonization topics. So I think we would like to just support the policymakers or the Chinese companies to move towards the decarbonization direction. And for information, our steel decarbonization report has been released today, both Chinese version, English version online. And also we are publishing another report on the hydrogen development in China under the zero carbon scenario, which will be in November or early December. So if you're interested, please go ahead and read it, and we are happy to hear all of your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, then, thanks for everything from Rocky Mountain Institute RMI, which just does such important work on clean energy around the world. So thank you. Professor Wang.
Yes, David. Thank you for inviting me to be here, and thank you for the great opportunity to share our opinion and research during this international channel and from your university. And I think this is really a great opportunity for me, and I learned a lot from other panelists. It's really great. Thank you. And what I want to say just in brief is the 3060 pledge of China is truly not a statement, just like what I mentioned. It is truly an action, a big action for the whole nation. And this action just be divided into sub-actions, so many thousands of actions from the companies and the regional government and also the universities. And for me, for example, in the past year, what I can feel is that all my colleagues and my friends who are working in this low carbon economy research and practice field, we are totally busy. We got so busy in attending so many kinds of conferences and so many kind of training. And also we got the training for the enterprises. So a lot of enterprises, the managers, they came just to our university and want to know what's happening there. What is 3060 goal, and what is the relationship between this national goal and our companies? And we also established many kinds of trainings for these corporations. And what we got from them as a result is that they do learn more from the trainings, and they just trying to make the strategic movement or the planning based on the 3060 pledge of our nation. So what I want to say is that, yes, this is not only a statement, and we are just in the movement to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, Columbia University has just launched a climate change school. It's a big new project at Columbia University. So I think it's very similar to your university's low carbon. So maybe we can find ways to work together. I hope we could do that.
Yeah, that is what I already asked Helena to make the connection or the relationship with your university. We do hope we can make our school internationalized and to have this kind of cooperation between different kind of universities. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we will keep in touch.
Ned Downie, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for organizing this, Helena, and the Beijing team of the Columbia Global Centers, and for David for monitoring, and the other panelists for really great contributions. Just a couple final thoughts. One, I think Erica's last point of the energy transition does bring out something that I think I neglected in my comments, which is that certainly going forward, concerns about energy supply and supply shortages are something that it's going to be important to watch the tension between that and how it affects sort of target setting around energy consumption reductions and by extension, carbon intensity reductions. The key thing for China is to reduce its overall energy intensity, its reliance upon energy intensive industries for growth. And in that context, that weakens the threat of power shortages, and lack of success on that regard increases the threat of power shortages. The other points that I have, just a more macro point, is that I think it's going to be really important just to watch for government policy over the next 5 years, because I really think it'll determine a lot of what firms decide to do. So I encourage people to look out for the National Emissions Peaking Action Plan, which should be coming out this year, give a good feel for what the priorities are for the next 5 to 10 years about peaking. And I think that, and to continue to look in this process as firms, I think as Professor Wang described really well, just try to figure out, what do we need to do? Because it really is sort of from a low starting point, but also firms are really trying to figure this question out. And because it's on the policy agenda, and the more that it stays on the policy agenda, and the more signals there are from government officials that this is something that they care about, firms will have to respond to that. So that's what are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And Erica, you have the last word.
I would like to echo my co-panelists in thanking everyone for a great discussion this morning. As someone whose research on Chinese companies and the energy transition is focused on the oil industry, is very interesting to me to learn what was going on in other sectors and to see that in other industries, there's the same fast pace of activity that I'm seeing in China's oil and gas sector. So thank you and good night to everyone in Beijing.
非常高兴哈，来一个最后一个发言，非常高兴，非常感谢这个组织给这个机会哈。作为一个环保工作者，因为我是搞环境保护研究的，这个遵守巴黎协定，把这个全球平均气温降到能够争取控制到 1.5 度，是我们义不容辞责任这块的事情。也希望各位能到我们中石油的进行交流，能进行交流。我现在做的工作主要是对这个中石油这个碳检测以及碳核算，还有刚才各位提到的碳足迹的定量评价。我现在做的工作做了这几项工作，这工作呢，我感觉做这工作很有意义。首先弄清楚你这个企业、你这个厂子、你这个企业究竟排了多少碳，哪个部位排放的碳最多，哪个部分排的小，然后有针对性的开展这个碳减排工作，我感觉这是非常有意义的事情。我们正在研究这工作，也希望得到各大的这个大的支持。非常感谢。
Well, we hope the same thing, and so let's be in touch after this. So look forward to that very much. And once again, congratulations to everyone who's released reports. We really and again, we have a couple that are out today. And thank you again to the Beijing Global Center, Columbia University, and to Helen and her entire team for organizing this event. It's late in Beijing. So have a good evening there, and thank you very much.